Hello Brain Shakers, welcome to the Brain Shakers Academy. Excited for today's session where we are looking at the spinothalamic tract. Now, what is the spinothalamic tract? The spinothalamic tract is another type of pathway that allows you to make interpretation of specific types of senses, because there is then transmission of that sensation from an area of contact to the brain for interpretation. Now, there are specific types of senses that this spinothalamic tract is actually going to carry, and we will be looking at that in a little while. So make sure that you watch this video until the very end. Now, let's quickly dive into today's session and look at the spinothalamic tract. And I have drawn a very simple diagram here that is going to help us to understand what the spinothalamic tract is all about. But before we dive into the spinothalamic tract, let me draw your attention to what is referred to as the anterolateral system. Now, the anterolateral system is a combination of about 4 important tracts, and of those 4 important tracts, the 2 tracts that we're going to be discussing about are what forms the spinothalamic tract. Now, we did make mention that we will be looking at the anterolateral tract. Okay, so the anterolateral tract system has 4 types of tracts within it. So at number 1, you will have what we refer to as the anterior spinothalamic tract. Okay, so already from spinothalamic, we know that it is coming from the spinal cord all the way to the thalamus. So it is a pathway through which those impulses are then going to move from a point of contact, from a point of pain, from a point of a stimulation, all the way to the brain for interpretation. So we have the anterior spinothalamic tract. Then number 2, we will have the lateral, okay, spinothalamic tract. And then at number 3, we will have what we refer to as the Spinoreticulothalamic tract. That is our 3rd one. And then the 4th one is what we refer to as the Spinotectal tract. Okay, so in brief, we have the anterior and the lateral spinothalamic tract. Now, these tracts, we're going to look at them in more detail because they run in the same tract indistinctively, and that is why in most cases they are referred to as one tract. So we will look at that when we look at the spinothalamic tract, because that is what we will be concentrating on. The Spinoreticulothalamic tract, this is the one that then keeps you alert and well aroused to whatever stimuli you will be stimulated to look at. Now, we know that the spinothalamic tract here is going to allow us to have sensation of pain, to have sensation of crude touch or pressure, and to have sensation also for temperatures. So the spinoreticulothalamic tract will help you be aroused and alert when you are in contact with a painful stimulus, so that you respond to that painful stimulus. The spinotectal tract helps you to open your eyes and rouse your eyes from side to side, and helps also in the movement of the head. Now, when we look at the anterior spinothalamic tract, so we can get rid of these 2 because we want to concentrate on the spinothalamic tract, which is part of the anterolateral tracts. So we have talked about these 2 additional ones, but let's quickly look at the anterior spinothalamic tract. Now, what is the anterior spinothalamic doing? What is it sensing? Or what type of sense does it transmit? So this one is going to transmit anything to do with crude touch. So we're talking about crude touch here, or pressure. Okay, so anything to do with crude pressure and touch is going to be transmitted through the anterior spinothalamic tract. And then when we look at the second one, which is the lateral spinothalamic tract, this one is the one that is then going to be responsible for transmitting nerve impulses about temperature and issues to do with pain. So those are the types of senses that are then going to be transmitted by the spinothalamic tract. So it is a combination of the anterior and the lateral spinothalamic tracts that then move that impulse all the way until we have interpretation. Now, once we have this understanding of what type of senses we will actually be or stimulus that these tracts are going to be carrying, it is imperative that we go back to this diagram and then utilize it for our understanding of the spinothalamic tract. So what we have here is, in red we will have a first order neuron, but before we label the neurons here, this here is going to be a spinal cord. So we will have the spinal cord here. From the spinal cord, we will move all the way to the medulla. From the medulla, then you will be going to the pons here. From the pons, and then you'll be going all the way to the midbrain here. So this then forms the brainstem. So we only have one part of a spinal cord here that would then utilize to help us understand the spinothalamic tract. And you have the main part here, which is going to obviously be the brain. Okay, now once we have labeled the major parts, we have this particular neuron here, which is in red. Now, if we take, for instance, that you have a hand here, and this hand has come into contact with a hot surface. Let's take, for instance, you are cooking and you have a stove that is on, and then your hand comes into contact with the burning surface. It means that this hand is then going to be experiencing some form of pain. Now, that pain is going to be transmitted and interpreted by the brain because of the help of the spinothalamic tract. So when the pain has then been elicited on the hand down here, what is then going to happen is that the sensors here, which we call the nociceptors, they are then going to get and stimulate the first order neurons. So you have a neuron here, which is just a way of transmitting a message from the point of contact or from the point of pain, sending a message to the brain. So this is what we are going to call as the first order neuron. So this is our first order neuron. Okay, so these usually are pseudo-unipolar neurons. So when we have a first order neuron, what is then going to happen is this first order neuron will come and enter the spinal cord through the dorsal root. Now, when it enters through the dorsal root, it enters through a tract that we call the Lissauer's. So that's double S here, Lissauer's tract. Okay, so it enters, this is for the first order neurons. So they will enter and form that tract, which is the Lissauer's tract, and then enter into the gray matter of the spinal cord. Now, when they enter into the gray matter of the spinal cord, there is an area which is very important here, where it is then going to synapse and pass over the message to the second order neurons. So the area is what we call the substantia gelatinosa. Okay, so it's called the substantia gelatinosa of Rolando It is named after an Italian anatomist who obviously first named it. So it is the substantia gelatinosa, or the SGR. So around here, this is where you're going to find this substantia gelatinosa. This is a point where the first order neuron is then going to give a message to the second order neuron. And during that passage of messages, so you have your first order neuron here, and then it brings the message to the second order neuron to transfer. So within this substantia gelatinosa, you're going to find that you have a lot of endorphins in there. You also have dynorphins, okay? And then you have also interneurons. Now, interneurons, they just help you transfer impulses from one neuron to another. From the terminology inter, in between the two neurons here, you will just be having that to help you transfer the message from this first neuron to the second neurons. You also find a lot of substance P here, okay? So these are all important when it comes to the regulation and modulation of pain. So the important area here will be the substantia gelatinosa. Now, once the synapse has then happened here, or the message has been passed to the second order neuron, what is then going to happen is that there is going to be movement of that second order neuron. So this one which has gotten the message now is what we will be referring to as our second order neurons. Okay, so these second order neurons, what they will do is they are going to decassette, meaning that they will move from the point of entry. So if you look at this, this is going to be the left side here, and then this is going to be the right side. So the order neurons will get the message from the first order neurons and then decassette or move towards the opposite, which will be the contralateral side, and not on the ipsilateral side. It will move to the contralateral side. And when it is moving to the contralateral side, so you will notice that it entered at, say, it entered at level 1. When it moves to the contralateral side, it moves at least 2 steps above. So it will move at least 2 levels above the point of entry. And when it is crossing over, it crosses what we call an anterior white commissure. Okay, so this is a point where it just decassettes and then moves towards the opposite side. So once it moves towards the opposite side, it will then start moving through the medulla, through the pons, through the midbrain, until we get through to the thalamus. But before we get to the thalamus, it is important to make a distinction whilst we are still here, that I have done another video on the dorsal column and medial leminiscal pathway, which does not allow a decassation of the second order neuron within the spinal cord here. The decassation of the dorsal column and medial leminiscal pathway is going to be happening in the medulla oblongata, meaning that this first order neuron will enter on the same side, and then the neurons will start traveling until they then reach the medulla oblongata. That's where the second order neuron will pick it up from to take to the thalamus. But with the spinothalamic tract, the one that is responsible for transmitting pain, the one that is responsible for transmitting crude touch and pressure, and the one that is responsible for transmitting issues to do with temperature, once the first order neurons enter the substantia gelatinosa in the dorsal root of the spinal cord, the second order neurons will automatically decassette and move to the contralateral side, and then we will travel on that side until we get through to the thalamus there. So this is your second order neuron. Now the second order neuron here are the ones that are going to travel in the anterolateral tract. So the first order neurons, they are traveling in the Lassalle's tract, and then the second order neuron will travel in the anterolateral tract. So you have that anterolateral tract for your second order neuron. So they are usually traveling in the same pathway indistinctively, and that is why sometimes they are referred to as just being one tract. Now, when we get to the thalamus here, when we get to the thalamus, an important point is what we call the VPLN. Now, the VPLN is just ventro postero lateral nucleus. Okay? So this is where the second order neuron is then going to terminate. And when it terminates here in the thalamus, all it is going to do is that it will then pass that message to the third order neuron. Now, the third order neuron will pick the message from the VPLN here, which is the ventroposterolateral nucleus, and then it is going to transmit the message to another important area, which we are going to call the primary sensory cortex. Okay, so it will transmit the impulse from there all the way to the primary sensory cortex there, and when it sends the message to the primary sensory cortex, it will be traveling through another tract that we will call the somatotopic tract. Okay, that is for third order neurons. So they will go through the somatotopic tract system to move to the primary sensory cortex, and from the primary sensory cortex, that message will be passed to the primary motor cortex. These are very close to each other because the motor cortex now is what is going to then make you move your hand from that painful or burning stimuli there, or from that hot surface, or from a painful stimulus, or from an area of touch. You're going to move that hand from there. Why? Because there's been a message that has been sent to the brain, and it has then been interpreted by the brain, and after the interpretation there's a message that is sent to the hand to say, take that hand off. So it gives you an opportunity to then react to that stimuli that you have. And this is the same thing that will happen when you are actually itching. So if you are itching, there'll be a message that is going to be sent to the brain, and there'll be interpretation. So your hand then receives a message to scratch where it is itching, and when you start scratching, it means that you are more or less interfering with the spinothalamic tract, so that there is no more sensation that is being sent to the brain that you are still itching. So that is what is going to be happening. So the spinothalamic tract is an important sensory tract that is going to help you to transmit that pain signal, help you transmit the temperature signals, help you transmit the CRUDE touch and pressure signals all the way from the point of contact, and then move them to the brain for interpretation. So all this is going to only be possible through the first order neuron, then the second order neuron, and then the third order neuron. But important to make mention is that the distinction between the spinothalamic tract and the dorsal column medial leminiscal pathway is that the decussation in the spinothalamic tract occurs around the substantia gelatinosa in the spinal cord, and then there is movement of the second order neuron to the contralateral side, where it will then begin to move all the way until the thalamus. Unlike in the DCML, which is the dorsal column and medial leminiscal pathway, where the first order neuron will move all the way until the medulla oblongata, where decussation then is going to occur. So that is that about the spinothalamic tract. It is a very simple and interesting tract to then understand, because you then understand what actually happens when your body is moving itself from a painful stimuli, and how your body then transmits all those pain signals, signals of touch, signals of crude pressure as well, and signals of temperature. So that is the spinothalamic tract. And if you particularly found this video interesting in understanding a simplified version of what the spinothalamic tract is, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up, share the video as much as possible, recommend the channel, and if you have not yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, recommend the channel, and remember to turn the notifications button on as well, so that you do not miss any of this amazing stuff that we are going to be sharing. Now there is also membership, where you have the privilege of becoming a member of the Brain Shakers team. So join the membership team and then enjoy all the exclusive benefits of being a member. As always, thank you so much for watching and for supporting the channel, and I will see you in my next video.